Today's guest has been a bouncer, lawyer, African clean energy consultant, and entrepreneur. So I guess it's not surprising that he leads HireMe Healthcare, which focuses on matching nurses to jobs they love, sharing helpful resources like free educational courses, and providing personalized support to nurses throughout their career journeys. Hi, everyone. I'm David Williams, president of strategy consulting firm Health Business Group and host of the HealthBiz podcast, a weekly show where I interview top healthcare leaders about their lives and careers. Please leave a comment, subscribe, or leave a rating or review. Ryan, welcome to the HealthBiz podcast.
Hey, David, it's great to be here today.
You know, a lot of the guests that I have, I could look at their resume and sort of makes kind of a clear linear sense. And I'm just figuring, okay, we're talking about all the same kind of thing. But I saw from yours, which is layered with many interesting pieces. It was more just I had to pick out, what was what. But I want to start even before what's on your LinkedIn profile and ask you about your upbringing, your childhood. What was that like, and any influences that have stuck with you into your career?
Yeah, so I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. I lived a pretty mundane childhood, if I'm being perfectly honest. Played football, lacrosse, all that stuff, and I grew up around entrepreneurs, and that is what impacted me the most. My dad, both of my grandfathers, from manufacturing to commercial glass, kind of across the board, but really in the consumer goods and manufacturing side. But they just taught me that the best way to work is to work for yourself, and I kind of got that mentality right off the bat. You've seen my profile; it's not all I did, but yeah. It's driven me towards where I am right now.
Sounds good. So you didn't go that far from home then to go to college, at least. So what was that experience like? And then you branched out and went further afield in this country and other countries.
Yeah, my dad made it sound like I had freedom of choice with regards to where I went to school, but that was not the case. I was born with Tar Heel blue blood, and I went to the University of North Carolina. You will notice where I went to law school. I was actually dying to go out to the University of Colorado. He said, "Yeah, just pay your own way." I got a full scholarship, so I decided, all right, now I can do this. And then when it came down to crunch time, I couldn't not go to Chapel Hill.
Yeah, I got it. And then what were you doing in Vienna?
So after I went to law school, so I guess I'll have to rewind a little bit to the college years for this.
Yeah.
So, when I was at UNC, I ultimately studied poli-sci and international studies. I say ultimately because I had many changes of heart while I was there. But the rest of the world has always been a deep passion of mine, from travel to different cultures and interacting in that way. And just the way the world works geopolitically has always fascinated me. So I studied a lot of international human rights and international business related things while I was in college and law school. And after practicing law for a while after law school, as we do, I decided to pull the trigger on a big shift and move both back into the entrepreneurial space and into the international space. And I found several programs. Some of them were very legal driven, LLMs and all that fun stuff. But ultimately, the program I landed on was it was a master's in human rights, which is something, it's hard to be opposed to human rights, right? But it was the appeal of Vienna, Austria that pulled me there. It was a chance to live there, work with people in the UN, and just really rub some elbows with the right people. It was about 20% of the cost of a comparable degree in the US. So yeah. Hard to pass up.
Yeah. Makes sense. Well, I know we're not going in full chronological order here because I got to rewind again to early career. And one of the things I saw you had listed was bouncer / barback. And what did you learn from being a bouncer? And and what was that like?
Oh, it discouraged intoxication quite a bit because I had to deal with drunken college students all the time. We worked at a bar that was notorious for underage people coming through, and it was a complex dynamic because if we turned away all the underage people, then we wouldn't have any business. But I learned, I learned a lot about how to work with a system even if you don't like it, no one likes cleaning up the floors of a place till 4 or 5 in the morning on a Saturday night while all your friends are, were hanging out there and you didn't get to partake. But, I learned that sometimes there's a benefit to being on the other side of certain activities. And it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, good. I think it's probably a good observation post, not something you necessarily want to build your whole career on, although I suppose some people do that as well.
Yeah, Roadhouse.
Yeah. So, all right. So you mentioned, practice law, and partly you did something a little bit unusual, I think, early on in a career, which is to open a solo law practice. And why'd you do that? And did that, what did you learn from that experience?
So this was it was derived from the kind of original co-working space. Now you look around, there's a co-working space in every block of any city in the country, but I was actually in the process of applying to the Navy JAG program, and there was an extensive application process for it. A lot of, you have to do a full medical exam, they have to do a background, all that fun stuff. And while I was in the process of that, I wanted some kind of experience, but I didn't want to jump into a law firm knowing that I was probably going to leave them very soon. So this was my first entrepreneurial endeavor, and I talked to a guy who was building a co-working space. He said, just come in here. There's plenty of people that you can learn from. You can pick up cases as they come through and, kind of choose your areas of focus, what sides of the law you want to practice on, which for me was criminal and entrepreneurial. A very interesting combination, but like strange cocktails, sometimes it works.
Yeah.
And I decided to do that while I was waiting to hear back from JAG. And down the road, I did end up getting into JAG, and there were some concerns around the direction our government was going and working a 4-year, you cannot leave without criminal punishment kind of ordeal with what we had going on. It was not something I was ready to devote my life to. So I ended up deciding against that and stuck with the solo practice because I really loved it. I had great mentors. I was able to handle, defendants well above my pay grade because I had proper supervision and got to really see how that was. I spent a lot of time in jail. I like to disclaim that was in a suit.
Yeah. Not an orange jumpsuit.
A proper suit, not an orange suit. You're right, David. And I also got to work with a lot of great companies and startups in a lot of various roles, whether, the full-on attorney for a party clothing company that has now exploded into a massive underwear manufacturer. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of Shinesty, but I've ran into a lot of people who wear their underwear. This is cool. It sounds like a plug for Shinesty. It is. It's a great company, but I got involved with them at an early age and several other just smaller companies starting up in the Denver and Boulder areas. And I got to just learn a lot about the challenges we face. And that's kind of where I found myself into a niche of early stage startups being my place. You have the people that'll say, I'm the 0 to 10 million guy. I'm the 10 to 50 million guy. Yeah. I found myself as focused on the early stage because there's just so much that you don't know. No entrepreneur that's not going in on their fifth, serial entrepreneurs get it, but most entrepreneurs are in for their first, maybe second or third time, and everyone's going to be different. So I got to learn a lot about really how to get something off the ground.
So talking about something different, African clean energy is different than a solo law practice in Colorado. So what was that about?
That was a project I took on. A guy that I had met at a hostel in Peru happened to be going down to Africa. I had just taken a job with the UN, but it was going to be unpaid. It was part of school. It was an entry-level position. And I told him about it because he was living in East Africa. And he said, well, I work for this company called ACE, African Clean Energy. And I know your passion for the human rights side is in health and human migration. We're bringing health-centric products into last mile populations, but we don't have an idea if they can go into refugee populations yet or not. And we just need someone to come down, build basically a startup within a startup for us and figure out from scratch whether that's something that can be done. And that's how I ended up in Uganda.
Sounds good. So I was once in Uganda, and I never thought I'd fly into Entebbe airport. And that when I got there, then I'd be, I wasn't attacked by flies and stuff, but I think people they end up getting malaria just changing planes there because it's an open air spot. But I managed to get in there, and they took me to the hotel, and it was, I got there and they said, there's no rooms left, but we have this other hotel. that you can go to. And I was with a bunch of people, and they're like, okay, I'm like, no way, no way. And I heard later that the hotel they went, had no. I was in a 5-star hotel. The hotel they went had like no windows, and the elevator didn't work, and it was it wasn't good. So the hotel where I was, Colonel Gaddafi had been there just a couple of days earlier. So
Oh, wow.
he had a different end than I hope that I'm going to have. But that was my Uganda story. So I has more to it, but.
Hey, you almost shared space with Gaddafi. That would have been quite wild. And all of that checks out from my experiences with Entebbe. And
Yeah, yeah. No, it sounds right. We were actually working on a program about adult male circumcision to reduce spread of HIV, and they would send these these kits to rural clinics, and because you could do adult circumcision, and it would actually reduce the spread of HIV significantly. But the clinics were so undersupplied that they would take the kits and they wouldn't use them for that. It's like, wow, sutures and all stuff that they would just break out the kits and use them for other supplies, and they didn't necessarily have power or clean water either. So the Gates people had some learning to do as well.
yep, understaffed and undersupplied is the cornerstone of African healthcare, unfortunately. And we share some of those issues with them.
Yeah.
But
Well, let's talk about HireMe Healthcare, which is where you're currently the CEO, and we started the company. And I'm wondering about what opportunities did you see going into that business?
so it was a partnership with a guy I've known my entire life, a guy named Trey Ennis. Our dads were actually best friends in middle school. So when we say we've known each other for life, we mean beyond.
Yeah,
And he came to me when I was still practicing law. He knew about my passion for healthcare and that I ultimately wanted to bring, healthcare solutions particularly by making it more accessible for people to get into the healthcare profession that want to work in developing countries. And he said, you know what, I have this idea and I need some help on it from the legal standpoint. So I came in as his advisor in the beginning. He'd been working at a major hospital system and he was just working day in and day out. It's like, how bad it is to get a job. And I said, yeah, and no one likes applying for jobs. He's like, well, take it, amplify it by 100. And that's what it's like in healthcare right now. And so he's sitting there he's working hospital operations, funneling nurses into hiring managers right onto their desk, basically all but that. And through a lot of these traditional practices, they still weren't even seeing the resumes of the people he brought in, let alone the qualified people applying. And yet in a meeting following that, everyone's complaining that there aren't enough nurses and that they can't find anybody. So he said, this is traditional hiring practices at its finest, and it's crippling our healthcare system. This was in 2017.
yeah,
So before it was front page of Wall Street Journal news. And, I said, I would love to get involved in that. And I think you're onto something. I'd love to be a part. And I went with him to vet an investor one day. There's a guy that I knew had a really good reputation. He had a great exit in the staffing space. And, just wanted to make sure Trey was going to get a good deal. It's a guy who had employed a lot of my friends, but I'd never met. So I
yeah,
knew highly of him. And so I went and sat at a Starbucks meeting with Trey and this gentleman, John. And I walked out of that meeting as the co-investor and a partner and co-founder of HireMe Healthcare. I don't know how Trey pulled it off, but it was truly the strength of the idea, the expanse of the need, and the fact that I just, I knew that this was the direction I was ultimately going to go, and it was a matter of how I get in.
So where did things go from there? There's a lot of companies out there that are maybe similar sounding in terms of what they try to do. What's the angle that you bring?
Right. We wanted it to be something different. And at the time, we were founded at the same time as a now $1 billion company, Incredible Health, that came out of Silicon Valley. It's a good example of what happens with a bootstrap company versus something from the Valley. But they went out and they've done a great job of, a lot of the core functions and tenets of what we would like to do. So we had to decide what makes us different. And we decided to focus on the technology aspect of it. Ultimately, over the years, it developed into this idea of what if hiring was more like dating? Right now, these employment relationships, particularly in healthcare, tend to be 90-day stints. And now you hear about half the people you talk to. How'd you meet your spouse? On Tinder, on Hinge. And there's something to it, because what are you doing? You're matching people to people, whether it's a nurse to unit culture or a human to a human for a bond. But there's just something that's coming out of these dating apps that manages to match people better, and the relational version of retention in an office space. And so we decided to focus on the technology aspect, really building out this matching side and testing the theory that if you find the right fit at the outset of a relationship, it's more likely to last. And it's not as simple. The resume is a way that we've used for as long as we've been alive. We believe it's on its way out, and we want to be on the forefront of that. But how do you find the person behind the resume, and how does the person behind the resume find more than a job description, find the people behind that job description? And that's what we're working towards.
What is it that you would say, you mentioned the company was 2017, been through the pandemic. Since then, we're out the other end of it for the most part. What are nurses looking for in their careers these days?
Nurses want opportunity for growth. They want clear pathways to advance into their specialties, deep into what they would like. A lot of our nurses a lot of nurses want to work remote. That's become a big thing in the aftermath of the pandemic. But above all, can't even give a silver medal. The number one thing nurses want is to be able to take care of their patients, and they want to do so in an environment that is comfortable, that is reasonable, where patient ratios are, so that they can actually give the proper care that they signed up for. They want what they signed up for when they were dreaming of caregiving.
Now, in your own career journey, just even within this company, you mentioned being co-founder and an investor early on, and you're the CEO now. How did that transition go, and what's that been like?
It was a mutiny. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
It was a very strategic decision that we had after a few years. Trey had brilliant visionary skills and was good at, he took this whole idea that is now our platform on a pen and a pad and turned it into what it was. And he was able to use the money we raised in the founders round. By raised, I mean 50% contributed, and to build a prototype and use that to test, to say, on an online platform, are we going to increase fill rate or decrease fill rate? But, he was able to prove these things out with a beta and really build kind of what the brand and vision and mission of HireMe Healthcare was. And then came the part where you don't get paid as a CEO. And that really started to weigh. And we had a lot of personal considerations to bring in. Trey's having children. I had one on the way at the time, and we decided that going to market, turning this from, the product that it is into a sales organization, into a business, and running that way was something that my experience lent a little more validity to. So we decided to switch that out. Trey became chairman of the board. I took over as CEO. We incorporated right around this time too, because that was the other big part is I was comfortable raising money. I'd been chasing grant money in Uganda all leading up to this. I've been a part of fundraising endeavors in the past. I had the legal understanding of what a term sheet is and all that. So we just decided that it was the smart business move to swap places at the time, and for me to go raise the money and build a team to execute on the day-to-day basis. And Trey's still incredibly actively involved. He's, as I said, chairman of the board, and he and I are still very close friends. And there's a book he gave me called Rocket Fuel about the visionary and the executor. And we still see ourselves very much in those two roles.
What you described before, wanting to be different and having an ambition and, helping the nurses figure out what's behind the job description and all that. On the one hand, it sounds like very touchy-feely. And on the other hand, it sounds like something that maybe technology can help with. How are you actually going about trying to realize this vision?
It does sound ironic using technology to humanize a process, right? But ultimately, what we're looking to do is find those aspects of what makes a unit culture and find a way to put those into the job description. And, there's ways to do that manually, simple as inputs of what do you desire, what do you value most in life? But there's also more highly technical ways. And a lot of these are AI and ML driven. not just dropping the buzzwords. They are on the roadmap very much for how we can take data sets from successful hires in the past, from aggregating copious amounts of data about each person and each job and each floor. Just it's not necessarily as simple as I want hustle and bustle. Therefore, on the fourth floor of Atrium CMC Main in Charlotte, I'm going to have the same experience as I would at Methodist sixth floor. There's a unique aspect to each one, and the more inputs that we're able to bring in, the more human qualities that can be brought into a personal profile. Because here it's not a resume where you have to elaborate on everything, hit buzzwords, or else it's going to miss an algorithmic block on certain keywords, which ironically is AI standing in the way of employment relationships
Yeah.
growing. But it allows for a lot of flexibility and for people to see a little more about the other side and then make an educated decision. Our technology ranks candidates based on fit. So starting at the top, you can go through and then your list is sorted. You have a stack of personal profiles that have applied, but you don't have a stack of resumes that made it through a blocker. Therefore, they must be the right fit. How am I going to determine that from a piece of paper? Oh, I'm going to interview, 75 people for this and just pray. We don't have the time and resources for that.
Yeah.
So our technology streamlines a lot of that at the forefront. So by the time you get to the interview stage, you know enough about your candidate to know, this is probably going to be someone that fits in with our unit.
Everyone talks about staffing shortages in healthcare, particularly nurses. From what you were saying up front and a little bit more here, it's maybe part of an issue of overall shortages, but there's also just a question of what's the right match and getting people so that they're able to do the job that they signed up for and so on. Leaving that aside for the moment, um, and looking at immigration, which is often talked about and has been sort of a solution to healthcare staffing, to what extent would you say immigration is the answer for staffing shortages in healthcare?
It's been effective, and it actually comprises a decent percentage. I think it's around 18% of the nursing workforce is immigrants, and there's been a lot of initiatives. One of the main countries involved has been the Philippines, and a lot of hospital systems, HCOs, bringing over labor from the Philippines to fill these shortages. It's a travel nurse that you don't have to pay 4x for, and they fill these roles well. They're talented individuals, and there was a bright future there. But unfortunately, at the beginning of this year, in the spring, our government decided to freeze all EB3 visas and made it so there's now a backlog of immigrants coming in to where they think that they will not address the current application stack until potentially until 2025. So it's an effective solution. And right now we need all hands on deck figuring this out because
Yeah.
there is a shortage. There's a talent shortage that results from a pipeline that can't fit it. There's not enough faculty in schools to get the amount of nurses we need into the workforce. The desire to be a nurse is there, but the seats in education are not. So we have this hole in our pipeline. So even if we fix everything on this side of that pipeline where hiring becomes efficient, technology driven, effective, retention goes up because fit is being found. It's still going to leave a gap. And I think the solution to this is multifold. And cutting immigration out, I think, was a very, very poor decision, as we've seen what staffing shortages do to our healthcare system, what our healthcare system struggling does to our entire economy, and what it does to the overall well-being of our people, both physically and mentally. Yet here we are.
The Philippines is sort of national export of people and is sort of set up to do that. There's other places I've been reading about phenomenon where you have immigration where it's not blocked and it may be a flight of people from middle income countries to the rich countries, and then maybe people who are from the poorest countries either to rich countries or to middle income countries. And I'm wondering, based on what we were saying about Africa before, what you see in terms of the African part of that equation.
Yeah, so I mean, on the ground over there, they're suffering from the same thing we are. They have a healthcare shortage, and similar to us, 50-ish% of sub-Saharan African healthcare workers are considering leaving the field entirely, and their reasons are the same. They feel, one thing you never hear immediately at the outset is underpaid. It's definitely a component, but it comes down to the way people are treated, their opportunities for career development, the autonomy they desire. And these are the same reasons that African nurses are thinking about fleeing the profession entirely. Now, as far as coming over here, it's still very difficult. I have several Ugandan friends who are dying to come live over here who, have established businesses, who could get through all of our requirements were they given the opportunity, but it's still very difficult to get a visa in the US. So we're not able to benefit from a lot of this talent I mean, to be perfectly honest, if they fled, and actually East Africa is at the lead of sub-Saharan Africa's struggle for nurses desiring to depart. But let's say they finally do leave and they get a visa and they come over to the US, they're going to be very, very disenchanted to find out that what was waiting for them, issues with career development opportunity, burnout, overworked, 8-to-1, 16-to-1, sometimes nurse to patient ratios. And they're going to find the same situation, but in a country that's a lot harder to afford. So I think I addressed your question there, but if you'd like to flesh it out a little further.
No, I think so. We could have a whole policy class on that, but I just was
Right.
curious based on your firsthand observations, both while you were in Africa and now, with your current work. I usually close by asking about if you have any books to recommend, and you mentioned the one that you thought personified you and your partner. Is that the book that you would you recommend, or what else would you have in your reading cabinet that you would suggest?
If you don't mind, I'm going to drop a trifecta here.
Sure.
Number one is a book by Dr. Jenny Byrne. I'm a little biased because she's a Tar Heel, but I read it and it's incredibly inspiring. It's called Work Smart, and it's about figuring out navigating where we are in the virtual space, just finding ways to survive what has become, the first chapter is about the burnout caused by Zoom, from just, you can get on blue blockers all you want, but it's still going to burn you out in a way that meeting with people in person wouldn't. And she addresses all of these, analyzes where they come from, and really offers some solutions you can become proactive on. And my life is, bootstrapped CEO is a tough gig, and my life has improved very much from reading that. And it falls kind of in the professional self-help category. So you're going to see me kind of sticking with a theme here. The other two I would recommend, I can't not recommend for those that have not read it, Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. It is a book about how much we care and how stressed out we get and how angry we get at each other about things that don't matter, that we only have a finite amount of F's to give. And finding a way to redistribute those is a way to improve life. And the third book is Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now, which is just a legendary book about being in the present moment. It's all of these have kind of helped really shift the way I look at my personal and professional life in a way that I think I would recommend them to anyone at any stage and in any professional and personal situation.
Oh, those are great recommendations. Thank you very much. I don't know if I can read 3 books a week or 4 if we include the other one that you had mentioned before, but I'll put that on my backlog. Well, Ryan Lee, CEO of HireMe Healthcare, I want to say thank you so much for joining me today on the HealthBiz podcast.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate you having me.
You've been listening to the HealthBiz podcast with me, David Williams, president of Health Business Group. I conduct in-depth interviews with leaders in healthcare business and policy. If you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite service. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe on your second and third favorite services as well. There's more good stuff to come, and you won't want to miss an episode. If your organization is seeking strategy consulting services in healthcare, check out our website, healthbusinessgroup.com.